Hello and a very warm welcome to the Late Breaking F1 podcast presented by Sam Sage and me, Ben Hocking, the final race review of the season, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. A race won by Lando Norris, helping McLaren win their first Constructors' Championship in over 25 years. It's been a fair while. Sam, it will be the last race for a fair while for us, but it's been a long old season, to be fair.
Yeah, we've made it. 24 races done, 6 sprint Grand Prix done, and we've got about a 90-day break until it all begins again, which is pretty crazy that it's going to come around that fast. What a season it's been. I never thought at the start of this year, especially after the first 3 or 4 Grand Prix, that we'd had such a wild ride. So many race winners, so many pole sitters, so many point scorers, every single team, and they do pick up points. And it wouldn't be as simple as Verstappen and Red Bull running away with it again, finishing third in the Constructors after that performance today. So it's been a big one. And we've got many review episodes to come of the year. But right now, we're talking about all the action that happened from Abu Dhabi.
And there's a fair bit for us to talk about. Part of today's schedule is just lap 1 because there's like 12 incidents to review on that alone. We've got to chat on Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton's last Grand Prix for the team. Pierre Gasly and Alpine versus Haas. That came to its conclusion in the Constructors' Championship today as well. We'll start out front though. Lando Norris had the pole position from yesterday. He was able to convert that into a race win. Oscar Piastri, of course, started on the front row alongside him. He had far from an ideal day, finishing down in 10th, but ultimately the Ferrari duo of Sainz and Leclerc, despite both finishing on the podium, not enough for them to claim their first championship in a long time. 14 points at the end, separating McLaren in first and Ferrari in second. Let's start with Lando Norris's win. It was fairly comfortable, it seemed. That gap between himself and Sainz up and down a little bit, but never really within DRS threat or anything like that. How impressed were you by Lando Norris's performance?
Very much so. I do think he was initially aided by the chaos that ensued on turn 1, of course, with Piastri flying off to the right, Verstappen off to the left, and here is Carlos Sainz right in the middle of you. It meant that he was already a good 2 or 3 seconds back from the McLaren driver by the time he got going again. But fair play to Lando Norris. It looked like once that gap was established, it was never going away again. He was very comfortable out front. The lap times were very consistent. He never showed any pressure, any worry, any upset. And the moment the pit phases started to run through as well, the fact that they delivered that 2-second exact pit stop under the pressure of, they could have afforded an extra half a second if they wanted to, but they didn't. They delivered one of the best pit stops we've seen. It really was an all-round fantastic team effort from the Lando side of the garage. In a nice way to cap off the championship as well. It meant that there was no permutations. It meant there was no weird maths going on where we had to try and work out what does X mean, or if they get maybe X fastest lap, or it was simply a one and done. Lando Norris wins the race, takes home the championship for McLaren, and they get to celebrate for the first time in a quarter of a century almost. Fair play to him. If you're going to do it, that was the right way to do it. And a cheeky little message over the radio there. Next year, I ain't coming second. So we'll be interested to see if McLaren can return and do it 2 years on the bounce.
Yeah, appreciate that fighting spirit from Lando Norris at the end. This was a very assured performance. It was unknown as to exactly what the strategy elements of this race were going to be beforehand. I think both a 1-stop and a 2-stop were viable. And there were drivers that did both. There were both options available for these drivers. And look, Lando Norris, he did exactly what he needed to do. Yes, Carlos Sainz was a couple of seconds behind at one stage, but I think McLaren played it strategically perfect, and it could have unravelled quite quickly for McLaren based on how that start went. Of course, qualifying was perfect from their side, getting both cars on the front row. And whilst Carlos Sainz was in that mix to begin with, Charles Leclerc certainly wasn't. So McLaren were the favourites coming into this race anyway. They really extended how much they were favourites by what went on in qualifying. And the first lap was definitely a win for Ferrari because you had Charles Leclerc making up 11 positions, which is quite frankly ridiculous. And of course, Oscar Piastri involved in an incident that saw him go to the back. And at that point, there's a lot of pressure on Lando Norris's shoulders because Charles Leclerc makes a couple more overtakes, Carlos Sainz is in the mix. Suddenly you have Ferrari could get themselves in a position where they've got options against the lone wolf of Lando Norris. And he managed it perfectly. I don't remember any particular errors. Obviously, track limits was an issue for some drivers. I don't remember it being a factor for Norris. When he was asked about the tyres in the first stint, his response was calm. There was no threat at all. And from there, he did exactly what he needed to do. As soon as Sainz came into the pits, Lando Norris followed him. McLaren, under pressure, need a good pit stop, 2 seconds. They saved one of their best pit stops for the most important time of year. So in a season where Lando Norris has not been... he hasn't necessarily avoided some poor performances here and there. There have been some errors from Lando Norris, particularly in relation to the Drivers' Championship. When he needed his best to secure the Constructors today, that's what we got. It's one of his best performances of the year.
Yeah, on a season where we've critiqued Lando, and I think rightly so, for his starting, which has usually been his biggest weaknesses. Many result been lost due to the fact that on the first lap, Lando has gone backwards and not turned a pole or a front row start into a victory. That could have equally have gone wrong today. You saw the launch that Verstappen got off the line for. Sainz could have done something quite equally as similar. And there could have been more chaos for Lando himself and not just for Piastri. So to be so calm, to be so assured right from the moment the lights went out, it's exactly what someone like Zak Brown, who I think was having a mini heart attack for 58 laps, really, really needed. And he's brought it home for those in Woking. I really enjoyed looking back on the Sky feed, actually, at those sitting at the Woking factory to look at what was going on. And their celebration, it really brought kind of a personal element to it. So nice touch and good to see it brought home.
It made me realise I'm a terrible person, the Woking thing.
Did you hate it?
No, because as soon as they did that, and I know obviously they want to get that crowning achievement of McLaren winning at the end, I really wanted them to lose and see all the disappointed faces.
I mean, it would have made for spectacular telly, that's for sure.
Yeah. I'm half joking about that. But yeah, I know what you mean. It was great to see, like, Zak Brown was incredibly enthusiastic at the end. I've never seen a man more enthusiastic about Woking. Nothing comes close.
So American as well. Like, it's not even a British person saying it. You know, I love everyone in Woking.
Big up Woking! So I appreciate it.
It's a mascot.
Yeah, but the enthusiasm from Zak Brown and obviously the people back at the technology centre was great to see. And yeah, in a season where, you know, Norris and Piastri, I think it's easy to forget how inexperienced of a lineup it is. You know, Piastri's only in his second season. Lando Norris, whilst he's been around a few more years, this is his first championship contending season. Leclerc and Sainz, between them, had the experience advantage in this sort of situation, even though they haven't won championships either. It would have been easy for what happened on that first lap with Piastri for it to go wrong from that point onwards. That could have been the thing that spiraled everything out of control. And the fact that Lando Norris just didn't seem fazed and knew that as long as he took the race win, it didn't really matter what Piastri was doing. And that's also credit to McLaren for the buffer that they have managed to obtain from previous races, to the point where it only becomes an issue if they aren't winning the Grand Prix. And in the last few races, it hasn't been easy going for McLaren at all. It's been a while since they've had a dominant car. You'd have to go back to Singapore and maybe Budapest for that. And despite that, they still did exactly what they needed to do. I was quite impressed in a season where I haven't always been impressed by how they've managed things.
Agreed.
Could Ferrari have done anything?
When Lando Norris has won it with that much ease, it feels like all of the what could they have done were very unrealistic. They could have put a car on pole. I don't know if they necessarily had the car to do that. They could have employed some ridiculous strategy that meant that one of them dropped back to almost very much in the method of Nico Rosberg blocking Lewis Hamilton in 2016 in Abu Dhabi, where he was almost driving at the other way around. Sorry, it was driving at the pace of a snail to try and get him overtaken. Could that have happened? It was very unlikely that was ever going to realistically be feasible. So realistically, no. Ferrari could have had Leclerc not have that 10-place penalty. He could have not got his lap time invalidated. It meant that both cars probably still would have only finished in second and third. Carlos Sainz could have beaten Lando Norris. Maybe. I don't think the car was really there for them. I think Lando had the machinery and the drive today to get the job done. And actually, they were helped by Max Verstappen throwing himself into the side of Oscar Piastri at the start anyway, because that's two huge competitors that Leclerc had to get past initially, essentially pushed out the way for him. He clears those immediately, moving him up the grid. So, no, is my simple answer. I really don't think there's too much more that Ferrari could have done there. You saw the disappointment, especially in Leclerc's face, after he was asked about Lewis Hamilton coming to the team next year, what a silly question that was, by the way. I don't think there's anything else that Ferrari could have done. They'd lost it before today. Mathematically still involved, but they were very much not going to win it today. I think we all said that coming into this race, that there's about a 10% chance that they were ever going to walk away with that title. So unfortunately, no, it's races like Canada that have cost them this season, not races like this one.
Yeah, just that whole stretch. Like when they brought in the Imola upgrade that wasn't really an upgrade. I know we're not reviewing the season today and that will come in a future episode, but it's that kind of stretch of race that has really cost Ferrari here, rather than, one race where they recovered pretty well. I think in terms of like the pace that they had versus McLaren, it's fairly level. I don't think there was much in it. But ultimately, even like the 10-place grid penalty for Leclerc that we were expecting to really hamper them, he basically nullified that after the first lap. Of course, he made up 11 positions. Like if he had started 9th and made up 1 spot to 8th, that would have been the same result as him making up the 10 spots anyway. And I think whilst he needed to use up more of his tyres and more of his energy to get by some of the other drivers, to the point where he was a full pit stop behind Carlos Sainz in 3rd, I just don't think they were ever going to get Leclerc in a position to do that pincer movement that was quite commonly spoken about on commentary, because whilst they were 2nd and 3rd for a good chunk of that second half of the race, it was kind of irrelevant because Leclerc just wasn't in that fight. Even though Sainz was within a 4 or 5 second gap to do something, Norris always had the ability to just pit and be ahead of Leclerc anyway. So I think the only way this maybe could have gone slightly differently is if Charles Leclerc had made an overtake on George Russell in that first stint, because he got held up a bit behind Russell. And if he makes that move, maybe they can get into that 2nd and 3rd position a bit quicker, and then they can start to look at different strategy options. But even when Sainz was 4 or 5 seconds back in that second stint, and the commentary are asking, what can they do? They need to try something different. Do they go on to a fresh set of tyres and try to make up that gap? You're asking them to make like 3 seconds a lap at that point. It's not going to happen. I don't really hold it against Ferrari. They probably did everything they could.
Yeah, the only thing I could maybe suggest is we saw how well it worked for Lewis Hamilton, was starting one of their cars, maybe Sainz, on that hard tyre, hoping he sticks it out in the top 3, which we know that he would have done due to the events that unfolded. And then if he stayed within kind of a 6 or 7 second window to Norris, swapping late onto the mediums might have given him enough late race grip to mount an attack on Norris for the last 15, 20 laps, much like Hamilton did, ended up overtaking Russell, of course, at the end of the race. I feel like that still, even then, would have been coming right down to the wire and wouldn't have been enough for them to take home the title. Even Lando finishing 2nd would have allowed them to take that win. So the permutations of their championship relied on much more than just beating Lando to this race win. They needed a bit of an act of God to really cause McLaren to have a proper issue. And I'm sure that their hopes soared when they saw Piastri flying off to the right of the track. Unfortunately, McLaren had done enough previously to this.
Yeah, and like you say, with Lewis Hamilton starting on the hard tyres, maybe they'd go the same way with Charles Leclerc. And it's easy to say in hindsight, based on how well Lewis Hamilton did towards the end of the Grand Prix, that Leclerc could have done the same thing and been closer to Sainz as an example. But then you have to ask the question of, if he starts on those hard tyres that are more difficult to warm up, does he make 11 positions on that first lap, or does he only make up 4? In which case, his whole race looks way more challenging, because he's having to overtake cars on a regular lap rather than the first lap. Like, he made way more progress on one lap than he did on all of the other 50 odd combined, which isn't, that's not a comment that's meant to be hateful towards anything or anyone. It's just, you can make overtakes far more easy on the first lap. And of course, having the medium tyre, that's an advantage versus the hard tyre early on. So maybe they could have gone something slightly different, but I think you could run that race a number of times and Ferrari don't get anywhere.
Yeah, it feels like a 1 in 100 times Ferrari win the title. The other 99, McLaren have got it.
19th to 3rd for Charles Leclerc.
Fantastic drive. I mean, you saw the way he orchestrated lap 1. And I say orchestrated intentionally because it does feel like it was a scripted scenario. It feels like he set up the pieces and knocked them down how he wanted them to be moved. The way he navigated the chaos, the move especially down into turn 9, the heavy braking zone with the chicane, where they're all fighting heavily on the inside of the corner. You've got the Sauber, the Haas of Magnussen, Perez is in that group as well. Zhou's in that group as well.
It's crazy.
Just
opens up.
It was like a video game. It was like he was playing the Formula One video game, and he went right round the outside. I think he made up 5 positions on that one corner alone. So half of what he made up in this one lap was done on that corner. Of course, he picks up another 2 from Verstappen and Piastri facing the wrong way. And then I think he ends up picking up another 2 or 3 just by the fact that other people were fighting each other and not really paying attention to him coming through. So brilliant composure in what is an incredibly high-pressure scenario. The hopes of Ferrari are on his shoulders. Sainz had done everything he needed to do realistically, but he delivered. And the fact they did finish 2 and 3, for the most part, is down to just how well Leclerc managed that lap 1.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's not something we often have to see Leclerc do, really, fight back from the very rear of the field, just based on the fact that he usually has a car that's capable, and he did have a car that was capable of being much higher up here. But look, it made it more difficult for himself, because even though he did have that 10th-place penalty, he could have been qualifying 12th, 13th or so, and he wasn't. He was qualifying right at the back because of what happened in Q2. So he's cost himself, or he could have cost himself more than what he actually has. But yeah, I think his recovery was everything you need from that spot. And ultimately, his race was always going to be with the Mercedes duo. I don't think it was ever going to be with Lando Norris or indeed his teammate if everything went to plan. And you can throw Piastri in there as well if his race had gone different. So yeah, I think Leclerc did a very solid job. He did everything he needed to do, and you could tell, you've already mentioned it, he was gutted.
Yeah,
he was absolutely. I know we talk about this when it comes to his contract extensions and the like. He bleeds Ferrari. He loves that team. And maybe it's to his detriment. That's something we've discussed before. But yeah, I think above anyone else, like, he seemed to be most gutted about how it went down.
I think Charles Leclerc is a very compassionate and empathetic person. I think when he loves, he loves. And I know that sounds odd, but the love he's shown for Carlos Sainz, just this race, I think shows you just how much he cares about the relationship between forms, and Ferrari being a key part of that. You saw, the Gracias Carlos on his helmet, the chili pepper to signify that. When they were walking out together before the podium, a lot of hugs, a lot of like, I love you, like, best of luck to you. Like, you could tell that there's a real bond there. And I think the same, as you've just said, is very much true with Ferrari, that it was almost slightly, as the kids say, bit delusional of Charles Leclerc to maybe go into this race weekend thinking there's a chance they could win it, sure. Is it realistic? No. And he should have gone into that Grand Prix going, I guess, he'll run my race, score as many points as I can get. If it happens to have unfolded that's a bad luck and hit another team, then we've got a chance to win it. But I think he drove that race going, we're doing enough. We're going to keep doing enough. We can take this off them right until the death, right until you heard that radio message come over, which bleeped his response, because it was quite simple, the disappointment he had in his voice. The man will do anything he can for that team. I know we say free Leclerc, but I don't think he'll ever want to go anywhere else other than drive for that team. So he'll be gutted, but it should spur him on to bounce back so much stronger next year. The kid's a winner. He'll find a way to do it.
Yeah, I can't blame him for the way that he approached this Grand Prix. He's been there since 2019. He's obviously been part of that driver academy even longer. And this was his first opportunity to actually win a full-on season trophy in the Constructors' Championship. So I understand his desperation and how much he wanted to use this opportunity. And the fact that they couldn't quite get there, the frustration is more than understandable. Let's take our first break on this Abu Dhabi review episode. On the other side, we're going to try and get through some of the incidents that we saw on lap 1. Sam, we had a lot of early race action. I think we've already discussed this maybe on last week's review, but we get to this point of the season, some of the positions, some of the championships end up being decided, and the drivers decide they can be a bit more liberal with their potential overtakes.
Proper end of school vibes, isn't it? Proper, I don't care about the rules anymore. It's summer holidays in a week. I'm going to be naughty if I want to be.
Exactly. And that has caused us to have a few things to discuss. So Piastri and Verstappen, we'll start there chronologically, of course. Into the first corner, Piastri had second place. Verstappen fancied it, went up the inside, and they have contact with them spinning almost synchro style, wasn't it?
A lovely pirouette from both.
Yes. 10-second penalty for Verstappen, though. Did you agree with that one?
Yeah, I do agree with the penalty. Verstappen is at fault. Yes, the door was technically open, but, you know, Verstappen put his foot in it right as it was about to slam close anyway and understeered into Piastri's path, who was more than half a car's length ahead. This is very much the school of thinking of, I was ahead at the apex, or I was alongside at the apex, if you agree that Verstappen had a right to be there. Come on.
Is that the rules we want, people?
Is this what we want?
That's what we'll get.
And, like, don't get me wrong, it meant for a spicy race. It meant that the entirety of the Grand Prix, there was that little bit of tension that it could go wrong for McLaren. Sure, great. But I don't want things decided by people driving into each other. I want it decided by good, hard racing, great results, wheel-to-wheel action, keep them on track.
I agree with you as well. Like, in terms of the championship, this became more entertaining as a result of that crash. But, like, from a pure race perspective,
yeah,
it was worsened because two of the potential contenders were knocked out after the first corner, and particularly Piastri, of course, driving the same car as Lando Norris that was capable of winning. They weren't separated by all that much in qualifying. No one was able to handle Lando Norris today. Maybe Piastri or maybe Verstappen could have done, but because of this incident, we weren't able to see it.
Yeah, weirdly, Ferrari might have actually felt that Verstappen might have been the trouble they wanted later on in the Grand Prix. Maybe he kind of did half a job for them and wanted the whole thing. I very much agree about this 10-second penalty. Something I'm not going to have a moan about, but I do want to raise is this new race director and the drivers have, it's been discussed that penalties should be more severe for contact between cars. And I'm all for that. I think that's right. I think it should mean that we get more wheel-to-wheel racing that avoids contact rather than has contact, which is good, I think. But my frustration here is, again, lack of communication between these governing parties, you know, the GPA, the GPDA, so hard to get that the right way around, the stewards themselves, and of course, Liberty. And I feel like if we're suddenly 3 races from the end having this change in kind of the race director, how the stewards are operating, and how the drivers want to be heard, something needs to be announced. 3 races from the end, and now, of course, the last race is an odd time to start enforcing a different variation of a rule set. I just need an announcement, put out a press statement or something that just says, we've been in contact, we've all had a conversation, penalties will now be seen as more severe. And I'm okay with that. But as a newcomer, if you're watching this for the first time, where you think, oh, just get into the sport, very hard to follow. Well, a couple of races ago, this would have been a 5, and now it's a 10. But I am in agreement that this should have been a 10, and I do think the right call was made.
Yeah, agreed. 10-second time penalty. He shoved it up the inside and was hoping for the best, and it didn't work. Like, and I don't mind him trying it. Like, but the execution has to be there, otherwise you deserve a penalty. He goes into the side of Piastri. And this is why I just don't agree with the way that some of these drivers clearly want the regulations to be in the future, where if you are ahead at the apex and you are on the inside, you can do whatever the hell you want. Because if that sort of move becomes legal, what are we doing? He wasn't alongside. He threw it up the inside, about as late braking, and I know I'm going against late braking, which doesn't seem right or fair, but I just don't think that was ever on. And 10-second penalty was all okay by me. He'll also probably get in a lot of trouble for what he said regarding.
I was about to ask you, what do you make of the comments that he came out with? You know, oh, why don't they just give us 20 seconds or whatever? Idiots, I think he called them.
Yeah, I mean, the 20 seconds thing, you can say that's absolutely fine, but you cannot, as Martin Brundle on our commentary very succinctly put, like you cannot say that sort of thing about the stewarding of a race, because there's and I've always said this, there's a difference between taking umbrage with a situation or a penalty and taking umbrage with the people that are giving you the penalty. I don't mind a driver saying that is an idiotic decision, no problem. As soon as you call the people who are giving it idiots, that's where you get in trouble. We had this instance with Perez this time last year, where they didn't like a similar-ish comment. I think he'll be in a bit of trouble for that one.
Yeah, I think it shows a lack of good sportsmanship as well. It shows you kind of a lack of respect for those who are, whether you like how they dictate a race or not. As I've just mentioned, I don't think the communication was clear on a change in the decisions. I still think that should be enforced. But someone as respected and is followed as Max Verstappen, hurling even a minor insult as idiots out like that, I do feel like that's going to cause a lot of people to maybe start going down that route where you can just start insulting people whose decisions you don't agree with. So, yeah, I agree that maybe you got the right choice of words.
That wasn't the end of Piastri's in the wars moments, yes, because he had an incident with Franco Colapinto, Franco Colapinto, an incident, regardless of whether he's the one causing it or someone is crashing into him. He hasn't been able to avoid them in this second half of the season, but Piastri goes into the back of Colapinto, and then Piastri gets his own 10-second time penalty. Did you agree with that one?
Yeah, I did. Again, if we're moving towards this more harsher set of penalties, it clearly caused some ramifications for Colapinto, and on this podcast, we don't judge based on the outcome, but rather the impact of the crash. So, he did crash into him, therefore a penalty should be given. I do agree with this. Why I bring up the ramifications for Colapinto is because a lot of people I've seen online have stated, I don't know what the problem is. It's not like with Piastri and Verstappen, they sprang off onto the sides of the track, they lost a lot of places. At that point, Colapinto was still going, no issue. It's important to know that even the minus of touches between cars, especially with the power unit involved, can really destroy someone's race.
A puncture, right?
Yeah, right. Immediately picked up a puncture. And to be honest, with the way he hit the car, there's a chance that he may have hit a certain component of the exhaust area or the function, because he had an engine failure later on in the Grand Prix, and that's why they retired the cars. So, yeah, perfectly justified. Piastri completely misses his braking zone, double lock up, straight into the back of another driver. I don't know what you expect, really.
If there's an argument for Piastri not getting a penalty here, I'd like to hear it, because I don't see it. This was fairly blatant for me. You can't go into the back of another car.
Yeah, do it on the motorway. That's an offence.
I'm not quite sure what the counter argument to it is. I thought they were going to completely ignore this as well, because they were looking at a couple of the other incidents and no mention of this, even by commentary, really, until a few laps later when suddenly it's announced that it's being investigated. I thought they were just going to brush this one under the carpet, and I couldn't quite believe it because, again, you can't drive into the back of another car. It shouldn't need saying, but maybe it does. Again, if you don't think it should have been a penalty and you can explain why, I'd like to know your reasoning, because I don't see it personally.
I think a lot of people view an incident and go, well, someone hasn't spun out the racetrack, so therefore it's not as implosive. It's not as obvious that something has happened because of this crash.
But it would have been better for Colapinto if that had happened, because a puncture means he has to go back and do a pit stop. If he just does a spin and the car's fine, 5 seconds later.
Verstappen, right? You literally saw Verstappen pit the spin up and carried on, and he wasn't even at the back of the racetrack at that point. Yeah. Exactly. So, yeah, there it is.
Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez. Bottas went into the side of Perez on the very first lap. Perez, there'll be other discussions to have, I'm sure, both on the podcast and at Red Bull headquarters about what's going to happen with that seat going into next season. But what did you make of that incident?
For me, this is a racing incident. They are wheel to wheel in the corner. Clumsy, messy. I do think that there's a lot going on in that corner. We've seen incidents with those corners before, most famously Hulkenberg when he was at Renault, landing on his roof and saying, I'm hanging like a cow?
It was.
Here or something like that. Yeah. And that corner does provoke a lot of awkward car positioning because of the way you swing round, and you can have, as we saw with Bottas looking up and hitting Magnussen later on in the race, some angles very quickly change. But for me, this was a mucky, clumsy. They were right next to each other through a very tight corner with the heavy braking zone. They've come together, unfortunately. I do think the blame lies slightly more on Bottas, the way he kind of came over the curb. But it's a wheel-to-wheel racing accident for me. I'm going to call it a racing incident.
Oh, it's the end of the season. I don't care anymore. Have another penalty. Bottas penalty for that one, I think, is fair.
You think full 10? Full 10?
I think it was less egregious than the other two, so I might have gone 5 seconds, but I don't mind a 10-second penalty for it. I think Bottas had an opportunity to get out of it, and he chose not to. And given it's his last race, maybe now, maybe forever, I kind of don't blame him. But yeah, I don't think Perez did anything wrong. I think Bottas had the opportunity to just file in behind. He didn't. And anyway, if you don't think Bottas should have got a penalty, I think that's fair enough, because Bottas made sure of it later on in the Grand Prix when he was
he did
next to Kevin Magnussen, which I don't think he's intending to do anything rash there, but that lockup where he goes into the side of Magnussen might be the most obvious one of the lot.
It's going to be like Jenson Button, isn't it? If he does ever come back, that man's going to have a penalty to serve.
Him, Jenson Button and Robert Schwartzman.
What a trio. If you put them in any other team, they could be winning things.
That's a quiz question for me to write down to use in like 3 years' time, isn't it?
Yeah. 3 to 5 years' time, you're going to bring that one up.
So basically, loads of penalties. Oscar Piastri, just to go back to him, because as we know, he started on the front row, involved in 2 incidents, one of which was deemed to be his fault, one of which was deemed not to be his fault. What did you make of his recovery? He eventually gets back to P10 with an overtake on Alex Albon. Couldn't quite chase down Alonso for P9.
I think it was really interesting to see how the McLaren up front, very much like Mercedes' dominant days, was so strong in that clean air where it wasn't surrounded by anyone else. But the moment it gets stuck behind another car, Piastri seemingly could not make any progress. They were clearly happy with how the car's shape was after the pit stop. No front wing change or anything. So the damage was absolutely minimal from both interactions he had with other cars, Pinto and Verstappen, of course. So that tells me that the car was probably operating at a good 98%. And in theory, that means that McLaren should be able to pass the likes of Fernando Alonso, who was stuck in front of Piastri for, and they're still going at this point. It feels like they're constantly stuck together. Then Lance Stroll came along and did exactly the same thing afterwards, which I thought was quite comedically timed from Aston Martin. He had good pace in open air. But unfortunately, he spent 95% of his race not in open air and was stuck behind another car in his dirty air, can't make the progress through the field, was unable to really make any impact because of this in the championship fight. And he could count his lucky stars that Lando Norris was up front for the entire Grand Prix, because otherwise it would have been a very different story, I imagine, for that McLaren team.
Yeah, I think McLaren had a plan going into this weekend that worked exceptionally for Lando Norris and worked whatever the opposite of that is for Oscar Piastri. They went with this high downforce setup, and I understand that, because despite the fact that you do have those 2 long straights, if you can be very quick in that final sector and do what McLaren did on Saturday and claim a front row lockout, as long as you can break that DRS, you're probably going to have the pace on everyone else. Exhibit A, what Lando Norris did. The problem with it, the downfall of that strategy, is if the first lap doesn't go very well, which of course is exactly what happened with Oscar Piastri, and suddenly you're right, he's stuck behind a number of cars, and I just don't think that McLaren was set up in a way where they could make easy overtakes on these midfield cars in a way that someone like Leclerc for Ferrari could do. I just think it was a difference in the way they set up versus some of their rivals, which works very well when you're out front, but not very well in traffic. And that's why, despite the fact that he did get some of them back, he didn't make more progress than the P10 he got to. So some of it is car setup. Piastri himself might be disappointed that he couldn't feature a little bit more, because it could have come down to the fact that him being 10th, 9th or 8th could have sealed or lost them the championship. But hey, Lando Norris has done enough on the day that 1 point for Piastri doesn't end up mattering. Shall we do Driver of the Day?
Yeah.
The verdict is in. You're the driver of the day. You're the driver of the day. You're good at driving.
For the final time this year, Sam, who was Driver of the Day?
Number of contenders. For me, I'm going to give it to Lewis Hamilton. A little bit biased, but last time in a Mercedes, to go from essentially just in front of Charles Leclerc and an inferior car, and to make that final move on George Russell. And there will be people that go, oh, if it wasn't their final race together, George might have closed that door. There might have been a bit of a...
I don't know.
It was a great move.
It was a great move, but Russell didn't give it to him.
He defended it all the way up the straight.
Yeah.
But there is a part of me that thinks, George is quite sensible. They're teammates. It's their last race together. At that point, he goes, I'm backing out of this. No worries. And if that's the case, fair play to you, George. That's a sensible thing to do. If not, Hamilton's still absolutely belting it around the outside to finish in 4th place. So sensational recovery. I think he can walk away from this one feeling proud. A big smile on his face. It's probably what he needed to go into the summer break, and it's what Ferrari would have wanted him to have, so that he goes into Maranello a bit more positive.
Yeah, I've got 2 contenders, Pierre Gasly and Lando Norris. Gasly, and we'll get onto this in the next segment, but Gasly did exactly what he needed to do in that Alpine versus Haas battle. And he was legitimately fighting in the podium positions early on in this Grand Prix. And Lando Norris, he won the race, and it never really looked like he wasn't going to win the race. I'll go with Lando Norris. I don't mind either of those. There are other shouts as well. Hamilton that you've said. both Ferraris did a good job too, but I'll go with Norris.
Can we just speak about Gasly's defence against Russell? The car positioning was sublime. He really was fighting well above his station, and the way he was making that Alpine work. What Alpine, why can't you do this all the time? You're actually good, actually quick. Gasly was phenomenal. He's ended this season, the last kind of 6 or 7 Grand Prix. He's been up there with one of the drivers of the season. We saw it when he went back to that year in AlphaTauri, when he went back in there, how good he was. He's just playing that level of form again. So hopefully they give him a car that's worth something next year.
It's not bad given the last 4 races or so, he's either qualified or finished inside the top 6, I think.
Yeah, like that's pretty immense. That's better than what Hamilton was doing at one point in that Mercedes.
Not bad at all. But we'll take the not out for this next segment. It's worst driver of the day.
Nice.
Get in the bin. Worst driver of the day. Bin. Worst driver of the day. You suck at driving.
Who's worst driver of the day?
Always harsh to do this, especially when a few people aren't ever going to be coming back. But I probably am going to give it to Valtteri Bottas. Despite me saying it was a racing incident, I do think he was more on the blaming side for that Perez crash. He also then completely missed his braking zone. It took out Kevin Magnussen in his last race as well. It just went backwards. From the moment they set off, it just went backwards. From such a fantastic Saturday where he was my driver of the session to end up being that bad on his final Grand Prix. It's a real shame to see him end up like that with not even a chance of scoring points. So, yeah, I'm going to tip my hat to Bottas. Sorry, Bottas. It's not the way I wanted to end our time together.
Why you got to do this, Valtteri? Why? I don't want to do this. It's our podcast. We don't have to, but in the interest of fairness, I feel like I do.
For the people.
For the people.
The love of the game.
I love this game. Quote Patrice Evra.
I wasn't expecting that.
I love this game. Yeah, Valtteri Bottas was the worst driver of the day. I blame him for the first incident as well. So obviously I think there have been 2 separate incidents that he's caused. One DNF and one, let's face it, should be DNF in Kevin Magnussen. So yeah, I have to give it to him, even though it might be his last race ever, or at least his last race for a while. Don't crash into others. I will, and this might be even harsher because it's his first race, but Jack Doohan was my other potential one because I get that he just needed to stay out the wars and do a full race and get used to an F1 car. But he was slow. He was really slow.
Got lapped by his teammates.
Yeah, which I understand. I accept and understand, but obviously we don't grade things based on, well, he's only done this many races, therefore we bump up his. That I don't grade it that way. So he was the other contender, but I am.
Yeah, my only saving grace for Doohan, and I said this in the qualifying review, is that he might have the same car as Ocon was driving, which have none of the improved bits.
That's also true, yeah.
Which I think is a fair nod, but yes, he also wasn't great.
Okay, we're going to take our second break. On the other side, we're going to get more into the battle between Haas and Alpine. Welcome back, everyone. Going into this last race of the season, obviously most of the attention going to the constructors' battle out front between McLaren and Ferrari. There were other battles up and down the grid, notably Alpine versus Haas and maybe RB if they had a miracle for P6 in the championship. Ultimately, Gasly's 7th place finish, Hülkenberg 8th place. That was enough for Alpine to secure P6 in the championship, finishing 7 points ahead of Haas in the end. Gasly obviously was mentioned as part of driver of the day, but how impressed were you by his performance?
He was fantastic all weekend. The way he navigated the carnage at the start after a really solid qualifying, which saw him in 3rd place at the end of lap 1, showed you just how well he's driving. Because I don't think in a month of Sundays, which funny enough is how Formula 1 works, Alpine would have expected Gasly realistically to have ended lap 1 up in P3. This was a real kind of, oh, crikey, we're really going for this. And Gasly was the man they put all their hopes on. He really was carrying that team on his back this weekend because, let's face it, even with an equal car, I don't think Doohan was going to realistically be helping them too much at this point. And Haas looked like they were really firing on all cylinders. Hulk did a great job in qualifying that P4. Of course, lost 3 places due to the penalty of overtaking under the bridge in the pit lane. And Magnussen was almost there. And the fact he got wiped out, of course, by Bottas doesn't help. And his race was tough as well. But it looked like Haas had the pace to fight with Gasly. And because they were 2 versus 1, as we've stated so many times, Alpine, you have two drivers. You had the ability to put both of them where Gasly was, and they were pretty equal in ability. It could have been much easier for you. And that's how it works. But Gasly did get the job done, and he got it done solo. So fair play to him. One of the pretty unsung drivers of the season, really, is going to probably go under the radar just how good this last half a year has been for him. Well done. He's essentially got them in the end, that 6th place, because again, Alpine shot themselves in the other foot by not bothering with the second driver.
Yeah, great work from Gasly. And it has been a theme of saying that in this second half of the season, because more often than not, he's been delivering in terms of qualifying sessions, routinely finding his way into Q3. I mean, even here, what did he qualify? 6th? And that was his worst qualifying performance of the last 3 Grand Prix, which is pretty remarkable for someone in an Alpine. Do have to give some credit to the team Alpine in that they have developed this car quite well in the second half of the season. Do have to mention that they really started very far down, so it was only up that they could go. But they have recovered quite well, really, since, maybe it was down to us. I think since we saw them in Austin, they've been far better.
They're late-breaking magic sprinkled on the garage.
I can't prove it, but equally, can I disprove it? Probably yes, but we're going to move on. They've done very well here, and Gasly essentially matched Nico Hülkenberg's strategy. That 3-place penalty for Hülkenberg, it's difficult to narrow it down to one thing that's really cost Haas in this championship battle. That could be something, because Gasly was able to match what Hülkenberg did. As soon as Hülkenberg comes in, Gasly follows him, and that gap between the two of them was just 2 seconds the entire race. Occasionally it got to like 1.5 seconds, and maybe it extended out to 3 seconds, but Gasly was able to keep him in check. What he did early on, that you've already mentioned, the defensive work against Russell, Gasly is legitimately one of the better defenders on this grid. Like, he is up there. What he did at Qatar was great as well.
Yeah,
he is very good at defending. And ultimately, Haas couldn't get 2 drivers in the fight. Partly out of their control with what happened with the Magnussen and Bottas incident, although Magnussen was already a few positions behind Hülkenberg at the time. And you could argue Alpine, and I would argue that they have got away with it a little bit, essentially sacrificing one of their drivers in this battle. You couldn't really expect more from Doohan this weekend, just based on it's his first race. But even so, Gasly has by himself done enough, and it caps off a really good season for him from an individual perspective.
Yeah, agreed. Feels bad for Magnussen, I'm not going to lie. He's had his ups and downs this season, but the fact that he's been taken out essentially through something that was nothing really to do with him, bit of a shame.
This was a weird race for Kevin Magnussen, because up until the point where Bottas, let's face it, took him out, it was a very typical Kevin Magnussen Grand Prix. Like, if you had to put money on who was going to be steaming down the inside on that first corner, on that first lap to try and overtake like 3 cars, you'd have gone, probably Kevin Magnussen. And it was Kevin Magnussen. Although at the end of the race, you'd have assumed that it was Magnussen being too aggressive and taking out another car and himself. And instead it was the other way around. It was something that wasn't his fault whatsoever. So he hasn't been as good as Hülkenberg this season, obviously. But there have been times where he's been able to match Hülkenberg and be in the fight. It was disappointing to see him taken out in that fashion.
Agreed.
Anything else Haas could have done realistically, or was this... Because it looked like they had a quick car, and I think they did have a quick car. Like, in practice, they were putting up some impressive times, but was this just a case of Gasly's done a very good job, Magnussen's been taken out by something that wasn't in his control, and you move on to the next season?
I think the damage was done in qualifying, and I think it was both driver-led. Unfortunately, Magnussen didn't do enough to get himself into Q3, and the car was so clearly there. Really was clearly there. Hülkenberg did a brilliant job, but then mucked it up for himself anyway by doing a silly thing like that. So that's frustrating. It's frustrating that on the day, if Hulk had kept P4 and Magnussen had got himself into the Q3, and even if you qualify something like 9th, that difference would have been enough. They might have won this by 1 or 2 points at the end of it, because Alpine are quite literally fighting one-handed, and you've essentially handed it to them with silly errors on this final day. So They're going to have to gather themselves and go again next year. I think they can take pride by just how far forward they've stepped since we were in this race last season. Because last year, they didn't understand tyres. This year, they're one race away from finishing 6th.
And they cap off this season having scored their second most points in a season ever. Which, they've been in F1 for like a decade now. So that is definitely an achievement. And as we will demonstrate in a future episode, far better than what we thought at the beginning of the season in terms of our predictions. No.
I didn't know Komatsu could do it like that.
Yeah, I thought Komatsu was a sous chef. But
yeah, I didn't know
the kitchen.
Man's got Michelin star.
Michelin star Komatsu. New
Yeah,
nickname for you, IO. Let's move on to Mercedes. They finished 4th and 5th here. Lewis Hamilton, after being knocked out in Q1 yesterday, the only driver to start on the hard compound, manages to go from 16th on the grid all the way up to 4th, and only a few seconds off Charles Leclerc, who finished 3rd, overtaking George Russell on the last lap. George Russell finishing in 5th place. Obviously, no podium, no win to cap off the season. There have been a few bright sparks for Mercedes to end this year. This race wasn't necessarily one of them, but if we focus on Lewis Hamilton's last race for this team, a team he's won multiple championships with, how did you view that?
I'm sure in a dream scenario, this is not the way he saw it going. I'm sure he didn't envision starting right down on the kind of the back 2 rows of the grid. I'm sure he didn't expect to have a bollard stuck under his car. And I'm sure he wasn't expecting Toto Wolff to have to come out with a statement saying how badly they mucked up the execution of the qualifying run. It's a very amateur hour, that qualifying session for Hamilton's side of the garage. The pace looked good in the car. So the fact that they fumbled the bag so many ways and then got hit with the bad luck of a bollard being stuck under your car as well. Sometimes you can't write it. Sometimes it really just doesn't. The cars don't fall your way. But Hamilton executed the race brilliantly. He was starting on the hard tyre, the only person to do so, as you mentioned. And that was such a fantastic strategic call. And he kept those tyres alive. He didn't start chucking it down the inside of cars. He didn't put his car in danger where there was so much chaos. He managed his drive through the grid really effectively. Behind Lawson, for example, for 3 or 4 laps. Or have a lot of pace. Gets the tyres warmed up, gets the move done, drives off into the distance. Next car. And then he got into this flow of every time I catch up to the car in front of me, they pit. More clean air for me. Next car. They pit. More clean air for me. And eventually, he finds himself in this top 5 fight. And because of the way that the tyres are wearing off, and some teams don't know whether it's a 1-stop or a 2-stop, he's managed to once again be the tyre whisperer. And we've seen this from Lewis Hamilton time and time again. The fact that he's only got to do about 20 laps on those medium tyres, which are by far the better race tyre, means that he was able to close that gap down. And very much like Vegas, where he had that final stint where every lap, a second gone, a second gone, a second gone, relentless. The way he was taking chunks and chunks of time out of the cars in front of him. And it wasn't like he just had to catch Russell and pass him. He had to pass the Haas again. He had to pass the Alpine again. He had Verstappen breathing down his neck at one point. He was on his way back through as well. Catches up to Russell. And what a sublime move. I don't want to take away just how good a move that was between teammates on the final lap to make that happen, to get himself into 4th place. It really was a brilliant drive from Lewis Hamilton in a car that on the day maybe was 3rd, 4th best, equal with maybe Red Bull at that point. A sublime drive, and something, like I said earlier, I think he could be proud of, and I think will allow him to go into the winter break knowing this old man's still got something in the locker. He can still do something on a race day.
I think going into this race, it was just one of those where this wasn't Mercedes' track. We've had a few tracks this year that Mercedes have been very good at. A few of those have been recently. Ferrari and McLaren had a clear advantage on Mercedes today, in which case 4th and 5th is probably the best they could have accomplished, given Piastri was obviously out of the equation. Lewis Hamilton, there aren't many things in this sport that are as good to watch as a charging Lewis Hamilton through the field. Like, there is something special about it. When he's got the bit between his teeth, when he needs to make up ground, whether it's because of his own doing or the team's doing, doesn't really matter. When he needs to go hammer time, as we heard and also didn't hear from Pete Bonington, when he needs to be that driver, it's a sight to behold. And you're right, seeing it a couple of times in the second half of the season, even if the qualifying side of things is letting him down, it does at least provide some encouragement when he goes to Ferrari that he's still got this electric race pace when he needs to display it. I didn't think he was going to catch George Russell. And when I say I didn't think he was going to catch him, there's a difference between catching and passing, as Murray Walker famously said. I didn't think he was going to catch on the back of Russell, let alone overtake him. We were about 13 laps from the end, and he needed to go at a second a lap, pretty much. And I was like, he might be able to do that for 5-6 laps. I don't know if he can do it for 13, because those tyres will wear off as well. The medium compound will. And he just maintained a brilliant pace to get that 4th place finish. We heard earlier in the race that apparently P3 wasn't off the cards when Pete Bonington said that over team radio. And I was like, nah, come on. I understand giving him encouragement. That's not on. It was on. It wasn't that far off happening at all. So Lewis Hamilton, you're right, this isn't the way he'd have wanted it to end, but it was one of his better performances of the season for sure. Shall we do Big Brain Strat?
Bob, we're gonna need you to box for wets. What? It's not even raining out. What are you talking about? Yeah, and Bob, if you get a chance, let your teammate pass you. What? He crashed out. He's not even in the race.
What have you got for Big Brain Strat, Sam?
Yeah, tricky one, because you could go serious and say something like Lewis Hamilton's strategy was absolutely fantastic. I'm going to go with RB simply not putting the tyre on the car properly. For me, that is one of those things. You know the book
Yes.
that we write down in?
It's a rather full book at this point, but yes.
It is, yeah, we can publish it now. Attach 4 tyres to car feels like one of the first things that should be in the book. That wasn't great. There's a couple of others I'll mention, but I'll let you pick yours out first because I don't want to start picking ideas out before you.
I just wanted to quickly go and spend some time on the Lawson thing and how he got hit with that 10-second stop and go penalty, which is a big old penalty for that sort of thing. You're right. Obviously, they didn't attach the front left wheel correctly, but it didn't seem to impact his pace on the one lap that he did. And even the commentators, I was certainly the same way, looking at that tyre like, is it? I think it is.
Slightly see it rubbing on the arch.
Yeah. It wasn't one of the obvious ones, is what I'm trying. It's not like one of those where you go to the end of the pit lane and it's falling off.
You know, when Lawson's message came out, you hadn't put the tyres on, mate. I was expecting us to cut and see the tyre bouncing down the road in front of Liam Lawson, who is now trailing on 3 wheels. That's what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah. I think for that sort of thing as well, you need to be extra safe about it. So I don't mind a hefty penalty, even if you are penalised by the fact that you are going slower than you would do on a lap. And I'm not convinced he was actually that much slower, even with that tyre being a bit loose. But yeah, it's not one that comes up all the time. So is it a fair one?
I don't think that car should have been allowed to finish that lap. If there's a risk of a tyre, and we've seen the damage that tyres can do, not just in Formula One, but in many different motorsports. Brands Hatch, there was an unfortunate incident only a few years ago where a loose tyre bounced clean over the catch fence and killed a steward horribly. And that's, so sad. This is the kind of thing that the car is just unsafe. It should not be driving around the racetrack. And you mentioned it, essentially full race pace. He barely lost time through the sector splits. If the FIA and the stewards are that unhappy with this, that a 10-second stop-go penalty should be applied, that car should just be black flagged. The moment that it's come out that tyre's not on, you drive to a steward's post slowly and you park the car. I do not believe that you should be allowed to drive around that racetrack at full speed, because what if he turned around and went, actually, I could do a few laps, let's see how it goes. Who's pulling them in? How long will it take them? I just don't think that it was that is enough. I don't think that's enough.
Yeah, it's a complex one because, like I say, if the team can detect straight away that there's something wrong with it, and I then agree with you exactly, like they should take all the precautions. But if there is some doubt about whether it is, obviously you don't want to force them to retire the car and then see, actually, no, it was all fine. So it's difficult to...
Sure, I mean, in most instances, as we've already mentioned,
yeah,
it is more obvious.
Yes, absolutely. And it might have been really obvious to the people in the garage as well. Like they might have just seen on it, like, it's not on properly, and you can make a call about it straight away if you're the team. But if there was some doubt about it from everyone's side, then it becomes a little more complicated. But
yeah, I think they got told to stay out if they were really kind of,
yes.
Well, we think we're okay. Actually, they knew they've got a sensor on that tire. They know if it's not on.
I'm going with a serious big brain strat to end the year. And it's something we just spoke about a little bit, which is the strategy of Alpine with Pierre Gasly. And the reason I say this, because Alpine and Pierre Gasly were fighting in the podium positions early on in this race, and he was holding off George Russell. Not like comfortably, but he was holding him off. And I think at that point, Alpine could have been distracted by that fight. And what they needed to do was race Nico Hülkenberg, because that was their only real competition, like in terms of the championship. And as soon as Hülkenberg comes into the pits, they pit Gasly the next lap. Now, all of the other drivers around Gasly waited longer, which was the quote-unquote right idea. But Alpine were very clever in that they knew who they were racing and they knew who they needed to cover off. I think Gasly could have maybe finished a position or two higher. Certainly, I think he could have beaten Max Verstappen if he goes longer on that first stint. I don't think he did the optimal strategy, but he did the optimal strategy for what he and the team needed, which is covering off the Haas. So I almost want to just compliment them for not looking to one side. Oh, podium battle? Okay, let's focus on that. They focused on the right thing.
It's something we compliment Fernando Alonso for a lot of the time. It's racing your own race, realizing who your fight is with, and not getting led down the garden path to try and have a crack at something that realistically isn't ever fully attainable unless things really go your way. So fully agree that Alpine did a great job focusing their battle on securing that P6.
Should we have a look at these bold predictions? The last ones of the year?
Fine.
Do you remember what Harry's was?
No, I never remember what Harry's was, and he's not here anyway, so no point regardless.
What did Harry say? Oh yes, of course, that was it. Oh man, that's wrong. That's very wrong.
Say it for the people, please, Ben.
Harry predicted that Sergio Perez would win this Grand Prix.
Oh yes. For behind the scenes, late breaking here, folks. Kirsty is mouthing the bold prediction at us through her muted screen. So thank you, producer Kirsty. Yeah, Perez to win. More like Perez DNF.
Yeah. If he changed it slightly and said first to DNF, it'd have been right. But first to finish the Grand Prix, not quite, which might be the nicest way of putting it.
Isn't that funny that every time he predicts a win, Perez doesn't finish a race?
Yeah. Weird. Sam, what was your bold prediction?
I said that Lewis Hamilton in some way would disrupt the McLaren approach to the title, allowing Ferrari to take the title. It was a long shot, and they never really came across each other. And Max Verstappen maybe should have been who I picked from that, not Lewis Hamilton. But yeah, still wrong.
You know when sometimes at the end of the season, like one performance or one race can really cap off what the whole season has been? That was my bold prediction. My bold prediction has just summarised what my year of bold predictions has been. I said that Valtteri Bottas would finish in the points. He qualified. He got through to Q3. Like, the amount of bold predictions this year that have just had promise and gone nowhere has been off the charts.
Yeah. If you were an odds man, you'd be always picking the second place guy. Right?
Yeah, that's what it feels like this year.
Yeah. Oh, well. There's always next year.
Is there? Do we have to do it again?
He's got 1 out of 24, but I mean, Harry's only got 4 out of 24 and he's won the whole thing.
He's not here. He can't win.
That's true. So I win because I've got 2.
Yep, well done. Harry's disqualified. You win. Shall we take our final break?
I suppose so.
On the other side.
Chatting away. What we doing, mate?
Moment of the race.
Yay!
Welcome back, everyone, to the final part of today's review of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. And that, of course, means moment of the race. Should we give our own moment of the race, Sam, and then we'll go to some Discord submissions? What have you got?
I'm just going to steal your one. I know what your one is, so I won't steal it.
Hey, I've got quite a few written down, so you go for it. Yeah.
Okay, good, because it really made me laugh, and that was Yuki Tsunoda's reaction to not being told that he could pit, being told he could stay out. It's just be there like, what? Like, are you having a laugh? Like, why? Yeah, Why do you make this decision for me? Really
sorry,
got me.
I just need to note to myself to put that on the soundboard.
Yes, please do. We need that. It was a real. I don't know if this Red Bull seat decision has played any part in his frustration, but he seemed very irritated for a lot this weekend. So, yeah, that's it for me. It's as simple as it can be sometimes.
Yeah, that was definitely a contender for me as well. I think overall there were two other ones that really caught my eye that haven't had a mention on today's episode so far. Firstly, this will be runner-up for me. Fernando Alonso, as soon as Lewis Hamilton comes into the pits and comes back out, of course he's just ahead of Fernando Alonso, who is on ancient tyres and yet still fakes the overtake to the inside like one last, oh, we almost got him. But my moment of the race was some team radio again, but a different one from the Sonoda one. Are we really going to lose the constructors like this? Yes, Charles, like this. Just
Beep.
I just love the fact that, like, are we really going to lose the Constructors' Championship like this? And they come back, yeah, we're going to use it like this. But we'll give it a go.
Yeah. I mean, there was another one for Ferrari that came up with me, which was the whole, we're going to try plan C if that's feasible. He's like, I don't really think that's very feasible.
Optimistic.
Trying a bit too much.
What have our Discord submitters got for moment of the race?
Well, we're going to kick things off with Dumb Electrician. But before we do, thank you to everyone this season that has submitted. Thank you to everyone that takes time out of your day to do a little message on the Discord. We're going to continue doing these into next year. Always remember, keep it super snappy, great quality, and bring your best banter because we absolutely love it. So thank you again. You really do add a little bit of lovely community to our show. So thank you. Dumb Electrician, what have you got to say?
Dumb Electrician here. Moment of the race was Piastri getting booted into the Shadow Realm by Max with a world-class comment about a world championship drive, and then proceeds to boot Roy Colapinto and picks up his own 10-second penalty. Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah, that one came back to bite him a little bit.
Yeah, you can't be saying things like that if you're then going to get a 10-second penalty yourself. Sorry.
For driving straight into the back of someone, not your finest hour. Although that was a funny line, and him going good to the 10-second penalty coming his way was great. Up next, one of our favourite EastEnders, it's Hazza.
Right, boys, my moment of the race wasn't having to build a bloody spreadsheet during the middle of it because the commentary team was so poor in keeping us up to date with the permutations. It was Kevin Magnussen pitting like 20 times for fastest lap on softs. And as we know, the fastest lap point goes away next year, so that'll be a pub quiz question for eternity. Cheers, boys.
That's true. That's another one you can ask about 5 years' time.
Yeah, I can't believe we haven't given more attention to Kevin Magnussen just going on soft tyres at the end for no reason whatsoever. Like, was it like 20 laps from the end? Sure, why not?
Softs. Feels very Sauber Zhou Guan Yu from about 15 races ago.
Yeah.
Just do it for the sake of it. I reckon we've got quite a happy man coming up here because it is the CEO of McLaren, the Bungalorean.
My moment of the race, McLaren crossing the line as world constructors champions. An absolute beautiful thing. We've done it. Papaya on top. Yeah. Also, it was really funny to hear all of the hope drained from Charles Leclerc when he realized that Carlos Sainz was no match for little Lando Norris. Yeah.
Lando.
You can only be so annoyed when you're starting all the way back in 18th place.
Get
the job done yourself.
I need to declare something right now.
What's that, mate?
If I hear Papaya on top again, I am stripping them of the championship.
It seems very fair. Very fair.
You've won a title. Just don't be cringy for one day.
Yeah. Just say
Papaya on top. Get out of here.
Just give the love to Woking, like Zach Brown did.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the way to celebrate it. It's Papa on top now. Up next is Nick the Quick.
What's up, Late Breakers? This is Nick the Quick. Moment of the race. Gotta go at Charles Leclerc. The rhythm. Not sure what that was. For some reason, I got Rhythm of the Night stuck in my head the rest of the race.
Banger.
K-Mag going sauce for the fastest lap. Shout out K-Mag. Enjoy your post F1 career. But yeah, interesting season. I guess congrats, Papa Rules, and we'll see you next year. Keep breaking late.
That was a hilarious comment as well. Okay, back into the rhythm. I don't know what rhythm you're on about, but this is it.
Yep. This is all I got, buddy.
Up next, it's our favourite. Are they crustaceans? Crabs?
They are, but this is a V crab, so it's a different type.
Okay. Let us know in the comments what kind of animal a V crab would be.
Hello, late breakers. V Crab here, the unofficial fishmonger of F1. Moment of the race. I mean, where do I begin? Honourable mention for Charles Leclerc, the overtaking about 10 cars at the end of the straight. But it has to be Lewis Hamilton overtaking George Russell around the outside on the final lap to get 4th place in his final race in a Mercedes, even though the race direction was appalling. And we still haven't seen a replay. But anyway, yeah.
I mean, it was a sublime move. We would be shouting about that from anyone making that kind of a move on the last lap for a position. So, well done, Lewis.
I'm glad it only took up 1/10 of my TV.
Yeah, I really like that we finally worked out split screen, but for them, split screen is 1% of your screen and 99% of your screen. They don't seem to. We had one moment where we were talking to Zach Brown. We had Lando Norris coming into the pit lane, and we had what was happening on track, and all of it was incredibly clear. Just do that more often. Deary me. Up next, it's Lucky the Leprechaun.
Hi, everyone. It's Lucky the Leprechaun here. I would just like to say that my moment of the race is McLaren finally winning after 26 years, the constructors, and I'm very happy about it. Subscribe to the Patreon.
I mean, good for you.
McLaren winning the pot gold.
We'll talk about it properly in our fuel season review episode. But if you are a McLaren fan, soak it up. Really enjoy it. It's been a long time. A long time. Got a last couple now. Finally, Mr. Spaghetti Dinner Lady is up next.
What's going on, late breakers? Mr. Spaghetti Dinner Lady here. Moment of the race was turn 1. Max Verstappen just being overly optimistic and going for it on the inside of Oscar Piastri. Doing my board dirty. But classic radio message from Oscar. Happy McLaren took it. See ya. Love the pod.
Thank you, Mrs. Spaghetti Dinner Lady. Coming in late with one of my favorite Discord names. Finally, to round off the moment of the races for this season, we've got the bearded rugger.
What's going on, late breakers? Bearded rugger, aka Tommy K20. My moment of the race, it's got to be Leclerc's charge all the way through the pack, P19 to P3. Definitely made the Constructors' Championship interesting all the way to the end. As a McLaren and Ferrari fan, I was a bit conflicted, but glad to see both guys on the podium. It's a hell of an end to 2024. Can't wait to see everybody come back for 2025. Cheers, lads.
We can't wait either. Is it sacrilege to support both McLaren and Ferrari?
No, do what you want.
You're goddamn right. That's the right message going into the new year with. Do what you bloody want.
Yeah.
That's it, mate.
That's it. Thank you ever so much for everyone who submitted for Moment of the Race here and also for all of the other 23 races throughout the year. And of course, we've had Under Pressure as well. Between the two of them, that's like 48 is lots of submissions. So thank you very much to all of you. And as Sam mentioned, we'll be back in some capacity next year, I'm sure. If you're newer to the podcast and you're thinking, wow, end of the season, can't wait to listen to these guys in 3 months' time. You can stop thinking that because we have got plenty of episodes still to come, the end of this season and the beginning of 2025 as well. Just to give you a quick rundown of what it's looking like the next couple of weeks. So our Wednesday episode, alongside some regular topics, we are going to be looking at our championship predictions. How did we do in teammate wars? How did we predict the constructors and the drivers' titles would go? We'll be reviewing everything there. And then 1 week from today, we'll be doing our full championship review. So we'll go through the entire calendar and pick out some key talking points. And then the following Wednesday is the big one. It's the late breaking awards, where Clive's Pigglesworth. And if you're thinking, who on earth is that? Don't worry, you and many others will be asking the same question. We'll be looking at some classic awards that we give out at the end of every single season. And there's plenty more, Sam, on Patreon as well.
There is. There's going to be a question either of this week or next week where we do the LB Hall of Fame. And as a big part of that, the community get to decide and inducted into the Hall of Fame. So cast your mind back through the whole season. I promise you now, when you see the current inductees, it does not need to be a simple, obvious, and serious solution. There's a fire alarm in there as an example. So
that's one of the normal ones.
Big Shaq is still trying to change the batteries. So if you want to see it as a funny thing, get your nomination in, get commenting, and you can vote for each other's as well. So do get involved. We've got lots to come. Patreon, we're recording so much. Honestly, we've still got a whole month of December. January, get another whole month. So February, we're not going anywhere. So check it all out. Formula One content does not go away just because it's the winter break. Thanks for listening throughout the year. We appreciate your support. It has been our biggest year ever, and we're still going. So we love you, and we'll leave you for this episode. In the meantime, I've been Samuel Sage.
And I've been Ben Hocking. And remember, keep braking late.